The crystal champagne flute nearly slipped from my fingers when I saw it. Hanging there on the gallery wall like some priceless artifact, bathed in museum lighting that made the colors glow exactly the way they had when I was 11 years old, mixing pigments at my grandmother's kitchen table. My childhood painting. My stolen childhood painting. Priced at $150,000 with a golden placard beneath it that read Untitled Work, Anonymous Artist, circa 2000. But I knew who that anonymous artist was. And I knew exactly what secret I'd hidden on the back of that canvas 24 years ago. Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe, it helps me keep sharing more. I stood frozen in my catering uniform, the tray balanced on my palm, watching wealthy strangers admire something they would never understand. Something that held the truth about what my stepfather did to my family. Something that could destroy a very powerful man if anyone ever thought to look behind the frame. My name is Emma, and I was 36 years old when the past reached up and grabbed me by the throat in a luxury gallery in Manhattan. I should tell you how I ended up there, holding champagne for rich people, staring at a piece of my soul hanging on a stranger's wall. The story starts with a betrayal so quiet that it took me decades to understand what had been stolen from me. Not just a painting. An entire future. Before I continue, you need to subscribe to Revenge Part channel because what I'm about to reveal will shock you. Hit that subscribe button now. When I was 11, my grandmother Rosalind was the only person who believed I had something special inside me. She'd been a painter herself in her younger years, before arthritis twisted her fingers into shapes that couldn't hold a brush anymore. She taught me everything she knew at that worn kitchen table with the yellow formica top and the burn mark from where my grandfather had once set down a hot pan. She taught me about color theory, about light and shadow, about how to make a viewer feel something without being able to explain why. She'd watch me paint for hours with this expression on her face like she was witnessing something sacred. And in the summer of 2000, right before she got sick, she told me I'd created something that would matter someday. That specific painting. The one now hanging in a gallery with a price tag that could buy a house. She called it my soul work. She said the colors moved like music. And then she made me do something strange. She made me write a message on the back of the canvas in her special invisible ink, the kind that only showed up under ultraviolet light. A family recipe, she called it. Something her own mother had taught her during the war. Hide the truth where only the patient will find it, she told me. Someday you might need proof of what's yours. I didn't understand what she meant then. I was 11. I just thought it was a fun secret between us. So I wrote the message she dictated, signed my full name with the date, and then I added something of my own. Something she didn't know about. Something that would become the key to everything. 2 weeks later, my grandmother died in her sleep. 3 months after that, my mother married Desmond Harwick, and our lives changed forever. Do you think you can tell when someone is pretending to love your family? I couldn't. Not at 11, not at 15, not even at 20 when I finally left that house with nothing but the clothes on my back and a rage burning so deep I thought it would consume me. Desmond was charming in the way that expensive cologne is charming. Pleasant on the surface, impossible to wash off once it's on your skin. He swept into our lives with his money and his promises and his collection of antique furniture that he claimed showed his refined taste. My mother was grieving her own mother's death. She was vulnerable. She was lonely. And Desmond knew exactly how to fill those empty spaces with things that glittered but held no warmth. Within a year of their marriage, everything that had belonged to my grandmother started disappearing from our house. First the jewelry, which Desmond said needed to be properly appraised for insurance purposes. Then the furniture, which he claimed was too old-fashioned for the new aesthetic we're building together. And finally, the paintings. My grandmother's paintings. My paintings. The ones we'd made together at that yellow kitchen table. I remember the day I came home from school and found my bedroom walls bare. The painting, my soul work, the one with the secret message on the back, was gone. I screamed for my mother. She found me on my knees, hyperventilating, clawing at the wallpaper where my painting used to hang. And do you know what she said? She said Desmond had taken everything to a proper storage facility so it wouldn't get damaged. She said I was being dramatic. She said I needed to learn that some things weren't really mine just because I'd made them. Desmond was standing in the doorway behind her, and I swear I saw him smile. If this story is making you feel something, that reaction matters. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my position. I'm reading and replying to every single one. I spent the next 9 years trying to find that painting. I searched every storage facility within 300 miles. I called auction houses, galleries, private dealers. Nothing. It was like the painting had vanished into smoke. And every time I asked Desmond about it, he'd give me this look of theatrical confusion, like he had no idea what I was talking about. What painting? You made so many silly little paintings back then, Emma. How am I supposed to remember one from another? By the time I turned 20, I understood the truth. He'd sold it. He'd sold all of my grandmother's work, piece by piece, pocketing money that should have been part of her estate, part of my inheritance, part of my mother's security. But I couldn't prove anything. And my mother wouldn't hear a word against him. So I left. I left that house, that town, that entire life behind. I moved to New York with $400 and a dream that had been stepped on so many times it barely resembled a dream anymore. I told myself I'd become a painter anyway. I told myself I'd rebuild everything Desmond had stolen. But the art world doesn't care about your trauma. It cares about connections, gallery representation, and the kind of luck that feels almost supernatural when you don't have it. For 16 years, I struggled. I painted in tiny apartments, sold my work for grocery money at street fairs, watched other artists get opportunities one couldn't even imagine. And eventually, I stopped painting altogether. The thing my grandmother had called my gift just felt like another source of pain. So I took jobs that paid the bills and kept my hands busy. Waitressing, catering, bartending at events where people who had everything would casually spend more on a single bottle of wine than I made in a week. I became invisible. The help. The background. The woman who hands you champagne with a smile and nothing behind her eyes. That's who I was the night I walked into the Vandermeer Gallery for a private collector's event. Just another face in a catering uniform. Just another pair of hands carrying trays. I wasn't supposed to look at the art. I definitely wasn't supposed to recognize it. The gallery was the kind of space that makes you feel small on purpose. Soaring ceilings, white walls that seemed to glow from within, track lighting that treated every piece like a religious artifact. The guests were all in black and silver, dripping with jewelry that caught the light like little scattered stars. They moved through the space with the confidence of people who've never been told no, touching glasses of champagne to their lips without even tasting it, because the champagne was just another prop in the performance of their wealth. I moved between them like a ghost, keeping my eyes down, counting the minutes until my shift ended. And then I turned a corner and saw it. The painting. My painting. My soul work. Hanging between a Basquiat sketch and a piece of contemporary sculpture that looked like chrome intestines. The colors hit me first. That particular shade of blue I'd mixed myself, trying to capture the way light looked on my grandmother's kitchen curtains in late afternoon. Then the movement, the way the brushstrokes seemed to spiral inward like water going down a drain, pulling you into the center of the canvas where something almost like a face emerged from the chaos. I remembered painting that face. I remembered crying while I painted it because I knew, even at 11, that I was painting grief. I was painting what it felt like to watch my grandmother's hands shake too badly to hold a brush. I was painting goodbye. And now it was hanging here, in this sterile temple to money, with a price tag that made my head spin. $150,000. For my grief. For my goodbye. For something Desmond had stolen from my bedroom wall while I was at school learning about fractions. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the champagne on my tray to lose its chill. Long enough for another server to bump into me and hiss at me to keep moving. Long enough for a man in a suit that probably cost more than my annual rent to notice me staring and frown like I was a stain on the wall. And that's when I did something incredibly stupid. Or maybe incredibly brave. I'm still not sure which. I walked up to a woman examining my painting through those tiny glasses rich people wear to seem intellectual. She was telling her companion about the raw emotional urgency of the anonymous artist's work, about how the untutored brushstrokes revealed a primitive authenticity that formal training would have destroyed. And I opened my mouth and said, "I made that." The woman looked at me like I'd sprouted a second head. Her companion, a man with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes, actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A real laugh, like I'd told the funniest joke he'd heard all year. "You made that?" he repeated. "The caterer made $100,000 painting?" $150,000, I corrected. And yes, I made it when I was 11 years old. In my grandmother's kitchen. In 2000. His smile didn't falter, but something behind his eyes went cold. "Security," he said, not even raising his voice. "We have a situation here." Two men in dark suits materialized from somewhere, the way security always seems to do in places like that. They flanked me on either side, their hands not quite touching my arms but close enough to make the threat clear. The silver-haired man was still smiling. "I'm going to need you to leave now," he said. "And I'd advise you not to make any more outlandish claims about the artwork. The provenance has been thoroughly verified. This piece came from a very respected private collection." "Whose collection?" I demanded. My voice was shaking now, but I couldn't stop. "Let me guess. A man named Desmond Harwick? About 60 years old? Sells antiques and family heirlooms that were never his to sell?" The silver-haired man's smile finally flickered. Just for a moment. Just enough for me to see that the name meant something to him. "What would you do if someone stole your childhood and sold it for a fortune? Would you stay quiet or fight back? Let me know in the comments because I genuinely want to know how you'd handle this." The security guards each took one of my arms, firmly but not roughly. They were professionals. They'd done this before. Removed the troublemakers, the crashers, the delusional people who couldn't accept that they didn't belong in spaces like this. I was being steered toward a side exit, my feet barely touching the polished concrete floor, when I said the words that changed everything. "Check the back of the canvas," I called out, loud enough for half the gallery to hear. "There's a message hidden on the back. Written in ink that only shows under UV light." I wrote it myself, and I signed my full name. Emma Rosalind Clark. August 2000. And there's something else written there too. Something that proves exactly who stole that painting from me. The silver-haired man held up his hand and the security guard stopped. The entire gallery had gone quiet. Every wealthy face was turned toward me now, champagne glasses frozen halfway to lips, expressions ranging from scandalized to intrigued. "That's a very specific claim," the man said slowly. "I assume you have proof that such a message exists?" "Take the painting off the wall," I said. "Shine a UV light on the back." "I'll wait." He stared at me for a long moment. Behind him, I could see my painting watching over us, those spiraling brushstrokes pulling everyone's eyes toward the center, toward the face I'd painted while crying, toward the ghost of my grandmother preserved in pigment and grief. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. Real, genuine fear flickering across the silver-haired man's face. He knew. Somehow, he knew there was something on the back of that canvas. And he was terrified of what it might reveal. "Get her out," he said, but his voice had lost its polish. "Now. And someone call the police. She's clearly unwell." The security guards pulled harder, dragging me toward the exit. But I'd seen enough. I'd seen the fear. I knew I was right. And I knew something else too, something that made my heart pound with a mixture of terror and hope. The silver-haired man wasn't just a gallery owner. I'd seen his photograph before, years ago, in an article my mother had been reading about her husband's business associates. His name was Frederick Mercer, and he was Desmond's oldest friend. The man who'd helped him sell my grandmother's entire collection. The man who'd laundered my stolen inheritance through the art world's back channels. If you're invested in finding out what that secret message says and how Emma gets her revenge, you need to subscribe right now. This story is about to take a turn that will leave you speechless. Subscribe so you don't miss a single moment of what happens next. The side door slammed behind me and I stumbled into an alley that smelled like garbage and exhaust. The security guards were already walking back inside, their job done. I was alone in the dark with my heart racing and my mind spinning through everything I'd just learned. Frederick Mercer. Desmond's partner. Which meant this wasn't just about a stolen painting. This was about a network, a system, a conspiracy that had been operating for over 2 decades. How many other families had they robbed? How many other artists had watched their work disappear into the hands of collectors who would never know the truth? I leaned against the cold brick wall and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type, but I managed to open my contacts and find the one number I'd never expected to call. The number I'd saved years ago, just in case. The phone rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered. Cautious. Suspicious. Exactly how I remembered her. Hello, my mother said. I closed my eyes and felt tears sliding down my cheeks. Tears for my grandmother. Tears for the little girl who'd painted grief at a yellow kitchen table. Tears for the woman I'd become, invisible and broken and suddenly holding a weapon that could tear my mother's entire life apart. Mom, I said. I found it. I found the painting. And I know what Desmond did. Silence on the line. Long enough that I thought she might have hung up. Then her voice came back, smaller than I'd ever heard it, barely a whisper. Emma, you need to stop. Right now. You don't know what you're dealing with. Tell me, I demanded. Tell me what I'm dealing with. Another long pause. And then my mother said the words that made my blood run cold. Your grandmother didn't die in her sleep, Emma. And if you keep digging, you won't either. The line went dead. I stood there in that alley, my phone pressed against my ear, listening to nothing. And for the first time in 24 years, I understood that my grandmother's death wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a nightmare I was only now waking up to. My mother's words echoed in that filthy alley like a curse that had been waiting 24 years to find me. Your grandmother didn't die in her sleep. The phone was still warm against my ear even though the call had ended, even though the silence on the other end was absolute. I stood there with garbage bags piled against the wall beside me and the distant sound of wealthy laughter filtering through the gallery's back door, and I felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. The grief I'd carried since I was 11 years old suddenly had teeth. It had claws. It had a name, and that name was murder. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. If what my mother said was true, if Desmond had somehow been involved in my grandmother's death, then going back to my tiny apartment meant being alone with a truth too heavy to carry. Instead, I walked. I walked for hours through Manhattan streets that never sleep, past neon signs and late-night bodegas and couples arguing on corners, and I let my mind work through everything I thought I knew about my own history. Before I continue, you need to subscribe to Revenge Part channel because what I'm about to reveal will change everything you thought you understood about this story. Hit that subscribe button now. My grandmother Rosalind had been 71 years old when she died. The official cause was heart failure. Natural, the doctors said. Peaceful, everyone agreed. She went in her sleep without any pain. I remember my mother crying at the funeral, remember Desmond standing beside her with his hand on her shoulder, remember thinking even then that something about his sympathy seemed rehearsed. But I was 11. What did I know about the masks adults wear? What did I know about the way evil can dress itself in expensive suits and offer condolences with the same mouth that ordered a killing? I found a 24-hour diner around 3 in the morning. The kind of place with sticky menus and coffee that tastes like it was brewed during the previous administration. I ordered a cup and sat in a booth by the window, watching my reflection stare back at me with hollow eyes, and I started making a list on a napkin. Everything I remembered about the weeks before my grandmother died. Every detail, no matter how small. She'd been worried about something. I remembered that now, though I hadn't understood it at the time. She kept checking the locks on her doors. She'd moved some of her more valuable paintings to a storage unit across town, telling me it was just reorganizing. And she'd made me write that message on the back of my painting, the message in invisible ink, the message that contained a truth I was only now beginning to understand. Hide the truth where only the patient will find it. She'd known something was coming. She'd known, and she'd tried to protect me the only way she could. The coffee had gone cold by the time I made my decision. I needed to get back into that gallery. I needed to see what was written on the back of that canvas. And I needed to do it before Desmond and Frederick Mercer figured out how to make the painting disappear again. But first, I needed help from the last person I ever expected to ask. I called my mother back at 7 in the morning. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting by the phone all night. Her voice was rough with exhaustion and something else, something that sounded almost like relief. "Emma. Thank God. I thought you might do something stupid." "Like what?" I asked. "Like go back to the gallery? Like try to prove what I already know is true?" Silence. Then a shaky breath. "You don't understand what he's capable of. What they're both capable of. I've spent 20 years pretending I don't know what really happened, and it's the only reason I'm still alive." "Then tell me," I said. "Tell me everything. Because I'm going back to that gallery with or without your help, and if I'm going to die for the truth, I'd at least like to know what I'm dying for." Another long pause. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her weighing her options across the phone line. And then she said something that surprised me. "Not on the phone. Meet me at the storage unit. The one Grandma Rosalind used to rent. I've been paying for it in secret for 23 years. Desmond doesn't know it still exists." If you're feeling the weight of this moment, if you're holding your breath wondering what Emma's mother has been hiding for over 2 decades, you're exactly where you need to be. Drop a comment and tell me whether you think her mother deserves forgiveness or not. I'm reading every single response. The storage facility was in Queens, an industrial complex surrounded by chain-link fencing and the kind of aggressive signage that promises 24-hour surveillance but delivers maybe 12 hours of a sleepy security guard. My mother was waiting by the gate when I arrived, and for a moment I didn't recognize her. The woman I remembered had been soft, pliable, the kind of person who bent in whatever direction Desmond pushed her. This woman looked hollowed out, like something had been eating her from the inside for a very long time. She was only 58, but she looked 70. We didn't hug. We hadn't hugged in 16 years. Instead, she just turned and walked toward a row of storage units, and I followed. The unit was small, maybe 10 by 10, but it was packed floor to ceiling with boxes, canvases, furniture I recognized from my grandmother's house. Things I thought had been sold decades ago. Things Desmond had told us were gone forever. "I salvaged what I could," my mother said quietly, watching my face as I took it all in. "The night before he cleaned out your bedroom, I heard him on the phone with Frederick. Planning which pieces would sell for the most. I managed to hide a few things here. I've been visiting in secret ever since." I turned to face her. "You knew. This whole time, you knew he was stealing from us, and you stayed with him anyway." "I was afraid." Her voice cracked. "Emma, you have to understand. 2 weeks after your grandmother died, Desmond sat me down and told me exactly what would happen if I ever tried to leave him or expose what he'd done. He said he had friends in places I couldn't imagine. He said accidents happen all the time to people who ask too many questions. And then he reminded me that my mother had died very suddenly, very peacefully, and wouldn't it be a shame if history repeated itself? The words hit me like a physical blow. I had to grab the edge of a shelf to keep myself upright. He killed her, I whispered. He actually killed her. My mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. She found out what he was planning. He'd been dating me for months, getting close to the family, taking inventory of everything Rosalind owned. She realized he was a con artist, a thief, someone who'd done this before to other wealthy widows. She was going to warn me, was going to call the police, was going to show me documentation she'd gathered of his past crimes. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. So he made sure she never got the chance. Do you know what it feels like to have your entire childhood rewritten in a single conversation? Every memory of my grandmother's death, every tear I'd cried, every moment of grief I'd processed over 24 years, all of it was suddenly poisoned by a truth I couldn't unfeel. She hadn't died peacefully. She'd been silenced. Murdered by a man who'd then moved into our house, married my mother, and spent the next 2 decades profiting from the family he'd destroyed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the storage unit apart with my bare hands. But instead, I made myself breathe. Made myself focus. Because rage without a plan is just noise, and I needed to be strategic if I was going to make Desmond pay for everything he'd taken from us. The painting in the gallery, I said. My soul work. You said Grandma made me write a message on the back. But there was something else I added, something she didn't know about. Do you know what it was? My mother shook her head. Rosalind never told me what the message said. Just that it was important. Just that it was insurance, in case the worst happened. I closed my eyes, trying to remember that afternoon at the yellow kitchen table. The invisible ink that smelled like lemon and something sharper. My grandmother's voice dictating words I'd carefully copied onto the canvas. And then, when she'd stepped away to make tea, the extra sentence I'd added on my own. The childish impulse that might now be the key to everything. This is the moment everything changes. If you're not subscribed yet, you need to fix that right now because the secret Emma hid on that canvas is about to blow this entire story wide open. Subscribe immediately so you don't miss a single word of what comes next. I told my mother what I needed, and to her credit, she didn't argue. Maybe she was tired of being afraid. Maybe she finally understood that some debts can only be paid in blood, or in truth, which sometimes amounts to the same thing. She gave me the name of the art appraiser who'd helped Desmond sell my grandmother's collection all those years ago. She gave me the paperwork Rosalind had gathered, the documentation of Desmond's previous cons, hidden in a lockbox under a pile of old quilts. And she gave me something I hadn't expected. A key. Small, brass, tarnished with age. This opens a safety deposit box at First National, she said. Rosalind set it up the week before she died. She told me that if anything ever happened to her, I should open it and give whatever was inside to the police. I was too afraid to do it. But maybe you're braver than I ever was. I took the key. It was warm from her pocket, warm from 23 years of guilt and fear and secret grief. And then I went to war. The next 72 hours were a blur of phone calls, favors, and carefully orchestrated manipulation. I contacted a journalist friend from my waitressing days who now covered art world scandals for a major publication. I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in estate fraud and cultural property theft. I even tracked down 3 other families who'd been victimized by Desmond over the years, people who'd lost heirlooms and inheritances to his slow-motion robbery and never been able to prove anything. But the real breakthrough came from the safety deposit box. Inside was a folder containing photographs, financial records, and a handwritten letter from my grandmother addressed to me. Her handwriting was shaky but determined, the penmanship of a woman who knew she was running out of time. My dearest Emma, the letter began. If you're reading this, then my fears were justified and the worst has happened. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from what's coming. But I've left you the tools to protect yourself. On the back of your painting, the one you made this summer, I had you write a message that contains account numbers and routing information for where Desmond has been hiding stolen money. 3 offshore accounts, all connected to art sales that were never reported to the tax authorities. It's enough to put him in prison for the rest of his life. But you added something of your own that day, didn't you? I saw you writing when you thought I wasn't looking. I don't know what you wrote, but I trust it was important. I trust that you, my brilliant, sensitive, brave granddaughter, knew instinctively what truth needed to be preserved. I love you. I will always love you. And I believe you will find the strength to finish what I started. I sat in that bank for an hour, reading and rereading her words, letting them fill the hollow space that had lived inside me since I was 11 years old. Then I called the journalist and told her I was ready. What would you do with this kind of power in your hands? Would you take the legal route or would you want more direct justice? Tell me in the comments because I genuinely want to know how far you would go for revenge. The story broke 3 days later. Art World Kingpin connected to decades of fraud, theft, and possible murder was the headline. The article laid out everything: the stolen estates, the forged provenance documents, the network of corrupt appraisers and gallery owners who'd helped Desmond and Frederick Mercer launder millions of dollars in stolen art. My grandmother's documentation formed the backbone of the evidence. The other victimized families provided corroborating testimony. And the painting, my sole work, became the centerpiece of the investigation when the FBI convinced a judge to order it removed from the gallery for examination. I was there when they shined the UV light on the back of the canvas. The FBI agent, the journalist, the lawyer, and me, all crowded into a sterile forensic lab while a technician carefully positioned the light. And there it was. My grandmother's message, exactly as she'd described in her letter. Account numbers, routing information, dates and amounts that corresponded to decades of financial crimes. But below that, in my 11-year-old handwriting, was the sentence I'd added on my own. The words I'd written while my grandmother made tea, never knowing they would become the key to justice 24 years later. Desmond Harwick poisoned my grandmother's tea. I saw the bottle in his coat. Emma Clark, August 2000. The room went silent. I'd forgotten. For 24 years, I'd forgotten what I saw that summer afternoon. Forgotten the strange bottle I'd glimpsed in Desmond's jacket when he came to visit. Forgotten how I'd written it down without really understanding what it meant, just a child's observation preserved in invisible ink because I wanted to be part of my grandmother's secret project. But some part of me had known. Some part of me had understood that what I witnessed was important, dangerous, worth hiding in a place where only the patient would find it. Desmond was arrested the following morning. Frederick Mercer was taken into custody 2 hours later, caught trying to flee to an airport with a suitcase full of cash and fake passports. The investigation expanded to include 7 other families, 12 forged artworks, and a money laundering operation that stretched across 3 continents. And in the center of it all was my grandmother's murder, finally being treated as what it had always been. Not a peaceful death. Not a natural ending. A crime that had gone unpunished for far too long. The trial took 8 months. I testified twice, once about the painting and once about the memory that had finally resurfaced after the UV light revealed my childhood words. Desmond's lawyers tried to discredit me, tried to paint me as a troubled woman with a vendetta against her stepfather. But the evidence was overwhelming. The financial records matched. The other victims corroborated the pattern. And my handwritten message, preserved in invisible ink for nearly a quarter century, proved that a child had witnessed something she didn't understand but had the instincts to document anyway. Desmond was convicted of first-degree murder, fraud, and racketeering. He's serving life without parole in a federal facility where his expensive suits and charming smile mean nothing. Frederick Mercer got 30 years. The gallery where my painting hung was shut down, its owner implicated in the laundering scheme. And the painting itself, my sole work, was returned to me in a quiet ceremony at the FBI field office. I held it in my hands for the first time since I was 11, feeling the weight of the canvas, the texture of dried paint that had been touched by my grandmother's fingers when she'd helped me sign my name. I didn't sell it. I never will. It hangs in my apartment now, in a place of honor above the mantel, where I can see it every morning when I wake up and every night before I sleep. Sometimes I think I can see my grandmother's face in those swirling colors, watching over me, proud that I finally finished what she started. My mother and I are rebuilding our relationship. It's slow, painful work. There are days when I can't look at her without feeling rage at all the years she stayed silent, all the ways her fear enabled Desmond's crimes. But then I remember how trapped she was, how isolated, how convinced that speaking up would mean death. She was a victim too. Just a different kind. The money from the recovered estate, all those offshore accounts Desmond thought he'd hidden so carefully, was distributed among the families he'd robbed. I used my share to open a small art studio where I teach painting to underprivileged kids. I tell them what my grandmother told me. That art is a form of truth-telling. That what you create can outlast anything they try to take from you. That sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice is simply the courage to leave evidence behind. If you'd told me a year ago that I'd be standing in a gallery, not as a caterer but as an artist showing my own work, I would have laughed in your face. But that's exactly where I was last month. My first solo exhibition. 37 paintings that told the story of my family, my grief, and my grandmother's legacy. And there in the center, carefully positioned under gallery lighting, was my soul work. Not for sale. Never for sale. Just there to remind everyone who looked at it that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep it's buried. The reviewer from the Times called my work a masterclass in resilience and the enduring power of memory. But my favorite response came from a little girl who visited with her grandmother on the exhibition's second day. She stood in front of my soul work for nearly 10 minutes, her small hand clasped in her grandmother's wrinkled one, and then she looked up and asked, "Did you really make this when you were my age?" I told her yes. I told her she could make something just as beautiful if she trusted herself. I told her to always hide the truth where only the patient will find it. She smiled at me like she understood exactly what I meant. And for the first time in 24 years, I felt like my grandmother was smiling too. The lesson I learned through all of this is simple but hard one. Justice doesn't always come quickly. Sometimes it takes decades. Sometimes it takes a moment of pure chance, like walking into a gallery and seeing your own stolen work hanging on the wall. But if you preserve the truth, if you document what you witness, if you have the courage to speak up even when powerful people want you silent, eventually the lies will crumble. They always do. The patient will always find what's hidden. And the people who thought they got away with everything will finally understand that some debts never expire. If this story moved you, if you felt Emma's journey in your bones, then you're exactly the kind of person who belongs in this community. Subscribe right now so you never miss another story like this one. Share this with someone who needs to hear that justice is always worth fighting for. And drop a comment telling me about a time when you refused to give up on the truth, no matter how long it took. I'm reading every single one, and your story might just be the one that inspires the next video. Until next time, remember that what they steal from you today can become the evidence that destroys them tomorrow. Stay patient. Stay brave. And never stop fighting for what's rightfully yours.